A boy was sleeping soundly in bed when he dreamed of footsteps outside the room. He opened his eyes to see what was happening when the door opened. A murderer was dragging the bodies of his parents, silently building a foundation to raise them up and then writing something on the wall with their blood. Then, hiding under the boy's bed. The boy was so scared that he held his breath. He couldn't read the words on the wall and knew that the murderers were hiding under his bed. For the safety of his body, he pretended to be still asleep and hadn't woken up. He lay still, quiet like the two bodies of his parents, listening to the gentle breathing from under the bed. Time passed. His eyes gradually darkened. He tried to read the words, but it was very difficult. When he finally read the words, he couldn't help but gasp. "I know you're still awake." At that moment, he felt something moving under the bed. When I was a child, I often read at night. I always left the light in the closet on until morning. The light filtered through the crack in the door and dispelled the illusion of darkness with a bright white light. I felt warm and comfortable. I felt so safe that I often forgot to turn the light off when I finished reading. But one night, the light suddenly turned off by itself. There's something behind the door. When I was a child, my family moved to a large, old, two-story house with large rooms and creaky floors. My parents both worked, so I often came home alone after school. One early afternoon, when I returned, the house was still dark. I called, "Mom," and heard her singing voice from upstairs. "What?" I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in, and got the same, "What?" answer. We were decorating the house at the time. Things were still a bit messy and I didn't know which way to go to the rooms. But the voices came from far away, right down the hall. I felt uneasy, but I thought it was normal. So I hurried towards my mother, knowing that her presence would dispel my fears. Just as I reached for the doorknob to open the door to my room, I heard the front door downstairs open, and my mother called out, "Honey, are you home?" in a cheerful voice. I jumped back, panicked, and ran down the stairs to meet her. But as I glanced back from the top of the stairs, the door slowly opened a small crack. For a brief moment, I saw something strange in there, and I didn't know what it was, but it was staring at me. It was 3 a.m. An emergency alert on my phone woke me up. It said, "Don't look at the moon." I checked my phone to see that I had hundreds of messages. Many were from unknown numbers that I didn't recognize. They all said, "Look outside. It's a beautiful night." I put my phone down, feeling extremely uneasy and confused. I had no idea what the hell was going on. I've always been a very gullible and trusting person, so I decided to follow those words and not look outside. I sat down, trying to think about the situation, and started to think about the possibility of a large-scale phone hack. I checked my phone again and made sure that I wasn't being paranoid and that the messages were real. And sure enough, they were. Then I saw a text from my mom. "Oh honey, look outside. It's gorgeous." Now, I started to panic. Was my mom in on this too? Was it all some kind of weird prank? I texted her back, "What happened? Why did you have to look outside?" And she replied, "It's beautiful outside, honey. You should look." At this point, I was both scared and confused. Why was everyone telling me to look outside, when the official warning was telling me the exact opposite? I was startled by the sound of a text message from my best friend. He said, "Hey, did you get that emergency notification saying don't look outside?" I breathed a sigh of relief and said that I had gotten the same notification on my phone. "I got the same message. What's going on? Do you know what's out there?" I told him that I had no idea what was going on and that I was worried. I also told him that my mother and everyone else had been texting me, which was the exact opposite. "That's weird," he said. Before I could reply to that message, there was a knock on my door. "Honey, it was my mother." I replied to her, asking if she had received any strange messages. "Weird messages? I haven't received any. Not a single one." I told her to come in so I could show her my messages, but she refused. I asked why she couldn't come in, but there was no response. I called my mother again, but there was no response. What the hell is going on? I asked myself. Then I remembered my unfinished conversation with my best friend. I texted him back, "Sorry, my mom just called. She's acting weird. Oh my gosh, I didn't expect you to be here." He replied, "I was going to tell you I'm going to look outside to see what's going on." "What? Don't do that," I texted him, but he didn't reply. I waited for about 5 minutes, worried and panicking. Then the phone screen suddenly lit up. It was my friend. I read the message from him and said, "Hey." I told him I was worried to death and asked him, "What happened?" My friend replied, "It's beautiful outside. You should take a look," and started talking like the other messages, leaving me speechless. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on my door. "Darling," the voice called me. The door slowly opened. My mother walked into the room, but it wasn't my mother. Standing at the door was a skinny creature with big black eyes. It had a creepy smile, wide from ear to ear, staring at me and saying, "Look outside, darling." I screamed as it came closer to me. The last thing I saw was my friend's message saying, "Look outside, before the moonlight burns my eyes." While looking at the moon, which was emitting an unusual light, I felt like my eyeballs were being stabbed by thousands of needles. I cried louder and louder, as my mother held my head back, laughing. I couldn't close my eyes. It felt like the longer I looked at it, the more drawn I was to it. Suddenly, my body lost all strength. My hands, as well as my legs, became limp, as I felt waves of chills spread throughout my body. My fingers felt itchy, and then I felt terrible pain, as if something was going through my skin, at the tips of my fingers. I looked down to see that they had grown longer, and my nails had become sharper. I began to panic. I tried to scream for help, but all that was out on the street were creatures, like the one holding my head down, forcing me to look at the moonlight. The creature I was now slowly turning into. As I looked down at the street, now covered in moonlight, I felt something move inside me, towards my lower body. I felt that terrible pain again, as if my stomach was being crushed and crushed. I stood there in horror, as my stomach gradually became thinner, as my body was being stretched and transformed. I screamed so loudly, it felt like my throat was about to tear out. Then it stopped. My mother let go of me, letting me stand up straight, feeling like she couldn't control her body at all. She looked at me with an even wider smile. "Isn't it beautiful?" she said in a whisper, and I saw a tear fall from her dark eyes. I tried to scream, but couldn't. My mouth was still tightly closed. Then my mouth opened, despite my control. "Of course, Mom." A voice rang out from my body. It was my voice, but at the same time, it was different. I wasn't the one controlling my body, even though my mind was still here. It was then I realized my mother was also trapped inside the creature, and she had witnessed what it had done to me. I wanted to cry out loud, but I couldn't. Then it took my hand and led me to the front door. We went outside and started walking, with similar creatures on the street. I could see my neighbors also walking away from their houses, their bodies also changing. "What should we do now, Mom?" I wanted to say to Mom, but all that stopped at the thoughts in my mind. Then the creature turned to look at me, as if Mom had heard my words. Then it turned away and walked straight ahead, towards the house of an old friend of hers. I was walking in the crowd, starting to cry. What should I do? Is this the end of humanity?